I have done a lot of webinars with the Construction Innovation Hub over the past couple of years about the toolkit, so it's really exciting to be here today as well, particularly with such a wonderful panel. I'd like to start off by introducing them. Next to me is Mark Reynolds, Chief Executive at Mace, and next to him is Varah from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. We have Tim Chapman from Arup, and Ellie, who you've already heard from, Ellie Jenkins, who's the Value Toolkit Integrated Project Lead at the Construction Innovation Hub, Alex Tait, Director of Practice and Individual Knowledge at the REBA, and Ian Nicholson, Value Toolkit Delivery Lead at the Construction Innovation Hub. So it's a really great panel, and I'm really excited to be here today. I'm actually going to pick up with Ali first, based off something that you said in your intro, referring back to a webinar that we did with you in, I think, April last year with Ron Lang. And you were sort of talking about, we did that to coincide with the launch of the pilot testing at the time. So for those looking at the toolkit now, how's that changed since then, post the pilot? How's it looking different?
So what's really exciting to see, having gone through the pilot stage, which is quite extensive, is where we've landed. And we'll talk through some of the changes from the pilot as we go through. But what we now have is almost a complete package. So we have the technical process that's all been agreed and signed off. We have the training and the tools to help industry get up to speed with where we're heading. We have the web app, and I know Dave somewhere in the audience, I'm sure he will advocate for the value of having digital tools associated with these kind of services. And we have the BSI Flex standard as well. So I feel in the last year we've taken quite a significant shift from having what was a technical process that had been innovated into a viable solution that can now be cascaded at scale.
Brilliant. So I guess that sort of leads me to ask, what happened during that pilot testing phase? And it's probably a question for both you and Ian that can cover that. But what did actually go on during that pilot testing phase?
Well, I think as you heard in the video at the beginning, we had about 140 organisations that came on board to test it. So we had a lot of feedback from a lot of diverse sectors within the industry that were testing it. So my team had a great challenge at the end of November after the 6-month testing period to actually try and assemble all of that and try and work out what the key points were that we wanted to that we needed to take forward. And I think there were 4 key things I think that came out for us. One is the integrated process that we developed that had 5 streams was it was great, really detailed, but actually it formed a bit of a straitjacket in the way people were interpreting things. So we've streamlined that down. So there's one, now we have 2 streams, a core process stream and a supporting stream on client approach, which is about additional things that clients really ought to think about doing if they want to really embed value-based decision-making into the way they run their projects. And those are things like risk issues, commercial-related issues and the like. So that was number 1. Number 2 was about how we measured value. And we've introduced the concept of scorecards. So it's about this idea of you change and evolve what you measure for as you move through different stages of your project's life. And that came about as well because we realised that as we were developing outcomes through the pilot stage, we didn't have much consistency in terms of the level of outcomes that we were asking people to develop and sort of embed into the process. So we had stuff that was really, really detailed, like achieve 65% reduction in embodied carbon, and another one might be reduce reoffending in a prison project. Well, how do you measure those and compare those? So we've changed the front-end process of how you define value to try and make sure that you get a consistent level of what we call outcome drivers that are equally measurable at the end.
I think the only thing that I'd add to that is one of the critical things that came through was that we really needed to drive alignment with Green Book. And I'm really proud and very pleased that we've got to a place where we have a clear statement of support from the Treasury team around how the Value Toolkit supports and enhances the Green Book process. For me, that was a really clear message that we received back from industry and one I'm glad we've delivered on.
No, that's brilliant. And I think both of you sort of covered off there things that you took away and refined moving effort. But were there any big lessons that you learned in that process that you think are really important to highlight to others?
I think there's one key thing, because I think I realised I said there were 4 things and I think I only gave you 3. The other one was, and I might be preaching heresy here, it's not all about digital apps. One of the key things that we really realised through the testing process is that this has to be facilitated in a really rigorous way. So you need trained people that know how to implement this. You can have loads of great digital apps, but without that training and knowledge that's sitting behind it, you won't get the rigour out of it.
Absolutely. Ellie, did you have any others that you wanted to add?
I think the key learning that we got back from industry is that it's simpler than they think it is at first glance. So I think looking at the Value Toolkit and shifting the way we think about decision making is quite a shift. It requires us to start to think about things differently. And I think there was a fear that that came with complexity. But actually the facilitators that we trained, and I can see many of them in the audience today, actually went, well, it's actually not that hard. Now I understand what I need to do and I've got the tools. Kind of makes a lot more sense. So for me, that was really reassuring that we had this message back that actually, once you had the tools to hand, you really had what you needed to be able to make that shift.
Brilliant. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Tim, you were involved as one of the pilot testers. So what was your experience like during that period?
It was really interesting. I think what people sometimes miss in the Value Toolkit, because it's not in the title, is a large part of it is actually helping set up projects to succeed. It's not just about achieving value, it's actually making sure, we're all aware when a project fails, and too often projects fail, that value gets chucked out the window and people actually start worrying about program and cost. We've all seen examples of that. But I think the breadth of what's in the Value Toolkit, I think is almost sort of Latham-esque in terms of its depth of what it will bring to change in the industry. And a lot of those great reports in the past were very wise, but they didn't have the level of embedment across the industry. And I'm really hopeful that the process that Ellie's described and other people described here will make that the biggest event of all of our professional careers, moving away from an awful lot of very bad behaviour. So when we explained that to the people who are testing it, first of all, we're dealing with people who are the best in the industry. The people who wanted to engage with it were probably the upper sphere. So therefore, they were already more receptive to the ideas in it. But I spoke to a number of organisations. Some of them were entirely on board. One I came across actually was terrified about it. And it was really interesting. They liked the certainty of cheapest. They liked the certainty of the fact that the NAO would only get them on one metric. I won't say which one it is. It's entirely, it's somewhere in a Zoom call about a year ago. But I was actually quite horrified that this particular organisation was not going to grasp the opportunities. Generally, they were really good. It was also very interesting going to outside the public sector organisations. And again, a lot of private organisations tended to be a little bit arrogant about it, and a little bit saying, well, we already know what we're doing. However, once we entered the detail, again, they really liked the detail, and they found it was a very, very good way of actually engaging to get the broader value that everybody wants, and going through democratic processes, as we discussed earlier. It was a very powerful way to actually bring public and private sector together to actually get the outcomes that everybody wanted. So overall, the pilot schemes I found really useful. But as Ian said, they did lead to a number of simplifications where we didn't really change the content very much, but we certainly made it much easier for people to engage with.
Brilliant. Did you sort of have any key lessons that you or learn anything that you think is important for others who might now be, picking it up?
Well, simpler diagrams help, because we've all gone out and explained very complex diagrams over the last 2 years and actually gone through them in probably too much detail. But no, I think the critical thing for me is actually explaining this is not just about value. Value is superb. We all know in public procurement we have to get better value for our money, and we go out and buy cheap. We actually don't produce good we don't even produce good cost value, never mind the other things that society now needs. But for me, the fundamental thing was we actually can set up projects to succeed more often. And that's the bit which I found most exciting, and which I found people have actually rallied to the cause of understanding this is about success overall across all metrics, including on time and on budget, but also getting all the other things as well.
Brilliant. Okay. At this point, Mark, I'll ask you to join the conversation as well, if that's all right. But so for both Tim and Mark, it would be great to hear sort of how do you see organisations like Arup and Mace taking the Value Toolkit forward?
The benefit of, I run an organisation, it's 7,000 people across the globe, and we come to work as individuals every day with 7,000 people. How do you get 7,000 people to work in a consistent way? You've got to have standard processes and standard procedures, and if you can digitise those to become data-driven organisations, then you're in a completely different place. So what the toolkit does is gives us a common platform to start working that through, and that's what I'd be excited about. And the other thing is, if you look back to look forward, we've got rings and rings of cost data, but not enough around value data. Just imagine of all of our major programs, really successful programs that are being delivered by UK PLC, that we had all of that data, value-based activities, data-driven, that we could say, this is the model that we should be using and adopting going forward. So for me, it gives us a foundation to take the industry to the next level. And what we need to do is embrace it, and rather than work as an individual, we need to work together as a team, Team UK Construction, to really deliver transformational change.
Absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, as Arab, we are a global organisation advising clients all the way through the cycle, and we're really excited about this. Now, we've got some of our colleagues in the audience here this evening because we want to engage with it globally. So while we think it's superb, and we think it actually, the fact it's been embedded in UK process is very exciting, actually there's a lot in it that is very relevant globally. So even without that sort of legislative basis, we're hopeful to use it to actually take what we do with our clients on our major projects globally to a next level, because we think it's transformative.
Brilliant. Alex, now it'd be great to get your perspective as well, because we've had sort of that consultancy view and construction view, but sort of how do you see the RIBA's community getting involved?
Well, to start with, the RIBA and many other professional bodies, and hopefully they're all here, our involvement was based on the fact that we have our own consultancies, and so our role is going to be primarily around embedding this in our standards and our standard processes. So that's what we do. We set competence, we create frameworks. So we'll be building the Value Toolkit into those. With the RIBA, we're lucky enough to have a specific dedicated audience of client advisors. So we have already a facilitation grouping, so we can concentrate on building those and skilling them up to help take part. So that will be our ongoing focus, but it's not hugely dissimilar from Arab and Mesa's approach, in that we're going to be looking at this as our membership. So if we can't bring our members along, then we can't succeed at all. So that's our starting point.
Yeah, so I think that sort of really outlines sort of the role that institutions are going to play driving this forward. But sort of from your perspective, why do you think we need to move to more value-based decision making?
Well, really, we have been doing it for a little while. We just do it on an individual basis. So we get it right every now and then. We get it right once or occasionally for a small collection of projects. So the whole point of building a framework for value-based decision making is so that we do it all right at the same way, the same time. And we build and we learn from it. So the data that we'll be able to collect from that is going to be incredibly valuable to all of us and government and the National Audit Office in the future.
Brilliant. Okay, and then the only other question I was going to ask you right now, just while I've got you, is what role do you see the RIBA having in delivering better social and environmental outcomes?
Well, I mean, all the triple bottom line of sustainability is incredibly important to us, as it should be to everybody. We'll be focusing primarily on some of the big ticket items around whole life carbon. But what's great about the Value Toolkit is, though that is there, so are the really small pieces too. So like things that are a bit more complex to define and engage with. So maybe things like net biodiversity, or not just the number of apprentices that we might be able to put on a project, but where they will come from and how they'll be treated.
Again, just shifting gears a little bit, Will, covering off some stuff that we have mentioned, but we have seen recently a sort of shift in policy narrative towards value. Do you think that's sort of set to stay, and how can the Value Toolkit sort of help deliver that?
Yeah, good question. So in September last year, the IPA published the National Infrastructure and Construction Pipeline, which Keith talked about. He talked about it on an annual basis over a decade. That's £640 billion worth of investment. And you can overlay on that. That's a huge but also a complex portfolio, and you can overlay all sorts of challenges. So inflation would be the obvious pressing one for now. And I suppose that's from the perspective of value, cost is in that, right? So cost, it's not that cost goes away, but actually that we start thinking about a broader range of value, because there are other challenges like capacity and skills. So we need to be thinking about those. There's no point thinking about one and leaving thinking about the others. So I think that's our starting point, but I think this government also has a really broad set of policy ambitions. So if we think about building safety, you can think about levelling up, and we can think about net zero by 2050. So those policy drivers aren't going away, and if they're not going away, then we're going to need ways of thinking about those, and the Value Toolkit is the mechanism by which we can do that, I think.
Brilliant. Sort of like pushing that on a little bit, and then probably Mark, I might ask you in the first instance. So obviously we've got these levers, we now have this toolkit, but what can industry actually do to ensure that value-led decision-making is embedded in the process? You touched on how important it is across a business to have standardisation, but how can that sort of happen across the industry more so?
The principle is really much the same. It's about getting as many of the industry leaders to embrace this, to then work on their programs, projects, parts of the business community to embed it. So whether it's a major program or an individual project, the best thing to do, the transformational change will come through the large programs across the UK. What we've got to do is embrace those leaders to try it, use it, and share the information. So very easily, High Speed 2. Let's sit down with High Speed 2 and look at how they can take this forward. We can then look at the other major programs and the agencies around the network rails of this, and then start using it. But it goes from one pilot to 10 to across the board. And then all of the large consultants, the large contractors, we were talking earlier about how we bring together all of the trade bodies. So we get them behind it with their members, and then we would have at least 3,000 or 4,000 people in the UK construction team really driving that through. So what we've got to do, and we were talking about it earlier, using the Construction Leadership Council, is try and convene the industry to get behind this and start using it. We started that right back at the outset when we looked at the construction playbook. And that's why it was embedded in the construction playbook around, we didn't quite get to mandate, but if we can get to mandate, then we're at the next level. But if we can get to adoption, and it's a place where people feel uncomfortable and not part of the club, then that's a different place. You want people in the team and want to be part of the team to take it forward.
Absolutely. Tim, I could see you nodding along very vigorously there. Did you want to add anything?
I've worked in the industry for 35 years, and for most of that I've complained about procurement, and everybody else has as well. I think we've been given a particular set of policy changes at the moment, which I think are transformational for our industry. This isn't just about making sure that we deliver value, but actually everything costs more or is later or whatever else. This is about making sure that our projects succeed far more across all metrics. Money, program, but actually lots of other things as well. I think the really exciting thing about it is actually the opportunity to change society for the good by the opportunity we now have. If the industry doesn't grasp this opportunity, I think it's actually, we will have messed up incredibly badly. I think the enthusiasm in the room is really palpable, but we're here amongst people who already get it and who know and understand. And therefore there is a thing about making sure that the whole industry follows us. An awful lot of industry initiatives, I think, end up remaining with the top 10% do them, and the big projects might do them, but the rest of it doesn't. And I think sort of this huge big tail in the industry of things that actually become very, very slow to implement. But if we don't take this opportunity as an industry to transform everything we do and create a better society, we'll have messed up really, really badly. So I'm excited by it, but we need to make sure we succeed in this opportunity.
Brilliant. So I guess the other aspect is, and Ali, you sort of touched on how great it's been to have the support and buy-in of government. Is there anything you want to see to make from government to make sure that continues moving forward? How can we make sure that value decision making is embedded in?
I think retaining that supportive policy environment is really critical, and I think it's been one of the big drivers behind the Value Toolkit moving forward. So as Mark referenced, we would really like to see the reference within the construction playbook updated, and that's something we're working really closely with the Cabinet team on as we speak. So I think if we can retain that, and we can see a drive through some of the major projects and programmes that are coming through the pipeline, both of those things will be pretty critical. But Will, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I probably would. I mean, I think yes, I would definitely agree the policy environment is there already. So in transforming infrastructure performance roadmap to 2030, which isn't like the BS, it's a long name, but societal outcomes are there already. So and as Mark says, It's built into the construction playbook, and actually that is a comply or explain. So it's not quite a mandate, but it is comply or explain. And I think actually Minister Rowley made a very good point, which is that we have agency actually. So it's there in the policy context, and now it's for us as an industry to make it real. And there's an awful lot that we can do without it being mandated from a policy perspective. I think the only other thing that I would add, sorry if I can take a little bit longer, is that it's sort of easy for us to. So I agree that that's a good ambition that we should aim for, but it's also sometimes easy to think that's it, job done because it's mandated. And actually, we can see from past efforts that there was a level 2 BIM mandate, and whilst there was an awful lot of progress, and there has been some amazing progress, it wasn't like, tick, that's it, job done, mandate. And, some people might say, well, actually, magically, everyone was level 2 BIM compliant the next day. But actually, there are still challenges, and it still comes to us as a sector to take this forwards because we choose to, because we think it's the right thing.
Absolutely, and the take steps forwards leads me nicely because I wanted to have a chat about next steps. I remember 4 years ago I interviewed Keith Waller when all of this was just starting for building, and I can't believe it's already been 4 years. But as we know, the Hub's funding sort of comes to a close at the end of September. So I guess what I wanted to know is what's next for the Value Toolkit after that. Ellie and Ian, that's probably one for you in the first instance.
So we're working, we've come out of the technical phase and we're going into a transition phase now. So over the next couple of months, you'll see some quite tangible things come through. The first is that you'll get the updated overview document, which gives you the Value Toolkit in a nutshell. The second is that later in the summer, we will be running pilots of all of the training courses that we've mentioned here today. Now, we're only running 2 pilots for each training course, so places will be limited on those courses, and we know there'll be a lot of interest. I'm happy to talk through with anyone afterwards, and we'll be doing some more promotion around how you get a place on those pilot sessions. So they're the 2 immediate things. I think we've already referenced the fact that we're working really closely with the IPA and BASE to secure that lasting legacy. But I guess I would go back to all of the audience here tonight and say, don't wait for that, take the mantle, make sure that you're embedding it in your client conversations, make sure that you think about how you're embedding it in your own organisational thinking. I think that's the mantle that needs to be passed across today.
If everyone could sort of give me a very brief one-line answer about if 5 years from now you were looking back and you wanted to judge whether the toolkit was a success, what would that look like? Does anyone want to be brave and go first?
Well, for me, you would be able to use it and compare yourself against what's been done in the past. So you'll be able to set that new benchmark to take things forward. And that's really what we want, is compare ourselves to make what we've achieved previously much better in the future.
Brilliant. We'll just go around, Will.
Okay, so yeah, really like that and agree with that. It's a pleasure. I think one that I would add is that we would start seeing that thinking translate into the way that the services are offered to clients. So at the risk of making it not really one line, we would move from like helping to deliver outputs to helping to deliver outcomes in the service offerings.
Brilliant.
We're facing into 3 massive catastrophes of climate change, biodiversity and social value, all of which need to be massively improved. And for me, if we start picking the right projects to do at the early stages and make sure we then deliver them to give the right outcomes, that for me would be transformational. I mean, Keith Waller's always said, we spend too long as an industry doing the wrong thing well. I want us to help us make sure we do the right things. I think that is, for me, sums it up.
Ali?
I think for me it's around shifting the wider narrative that we have within our sector. And I think if we have people across our sector being able to talk about value with the passion that I know everyone in this room would, I think that will be the landmark change that I'll be looking for.
Alex?
Well, the Value Toolkit's all about balance, and the primary balance conversation we have at the moment is around CapEx versus OpEx, so I'd rather like that to go away and for us to be able to talk about wider value, down to the nitty-gritty as well as the big picture.
And last but not least, Ian.
I think seeing those organisations that provide strategic advice to clients using it as standard. So, far too often you hear people say, oh, well, I'll do something if the client asks me to. actually to see this standardised, so it is the way decisions are made, full stop.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. So I'd love to say thank you to the panellists, everyone for contributing, and everyone who's contributed from the audience as well.